Hi everyone, hope you all had a fantastic Christmas and of course Happy New Year to you. You may remember some months ago now I did a quick video and painted a scene from the South Downs in Sussex. And as I was doing it, I identified, I think it was 10 separate skills or techniques that I wanted to look at in due course with you. We've looked at a couple of them already. I think the first one was to do with equipment. The second one was tonal values. I did a monochrome sketch of the old Harry Rocks in Dorset. And now it's the turn of colour. Understanding colour. To be quite honest with you, it's a bit of a nightmare, this one, because it's such a varied subject. There's so much we could talk about when talking about colour, how it relates to landscape painting and how it relates to watercolour as well. So just bear with me, because what I don't want this to be is a technical analysis of colour wheels and transparencies and opacities and all that sort of thing. Much rather, I hope that we can just simply understand the importance of colour in landscape painting and particularly how that relates to watercolour. You see, with landscape painting, the colours that you use are very, very important in conveying how you feel about the landscape. It shows what your response to the landscape is, and it marks your paintings out as separate to somebody else's. I notice this all the time in workshops that I do, where we'll all paint one scene, it's all the same, and yet the responses are entirely different. And often that's colour related. What you see in the landscape, how you feel about it, often comes out and is translated into the colours that you use, the way you mix your paints, and it gives your particular painting its own individual style. And this is why some of you have kindly commented on my paintings and said, Oliver, your landscapes seem to be so calm and peaceful. Well, that's because I love being in the landscape to feel that way. And often when I'm there around dusk or dawn, the light's soft, the shadows are nice, and I want to capture that in my paintings. That's my response to the landscape. That's how I feel about it. And so it dictates the colours that I choose. It dictates how I mix my paints. It dictates how I use them and I put them down on the paper. It's not an accident that my paintings look that way, because that's how I feel about the landscape. And that's what colour can do for you. So to make this as straightforward as possible, I thought what we would look at are 4 separate things. Firstly, the importance of primary colours in a limited palette. It's absolutely critical. I'll talk you through my colour charts that I've made and how useful they are in helping you to understand combinations of primaries and how the earth colours can have interplay with those, give you a lot more flexibility and combinations in your painting. Then what I'll do is I'll give you a quick tour around my palette. You can have a look at it and see the colours that I use, how I lay them out, how I use the palette, because the palette itself is critical in how I deliver my colours, how I arrive at them. Absolutely vital. And different palettes will either help you, or that you may find that they restrict you depending on your style of painting. And then finally, I'll make a quick landscape painting sketch, if you like, that demonstrates the importance of familiarity with your 3 primary colours and how you can use those to make compelling landscape watercolours. Before I show you my colour charts that I've done, I just want to help you to understand why a limited palette is important and how to arrive at it if you're painting watercolour landscapes, given the vast array of different pigments from the various manufacturers that you could choose from. The best way to think of it, I think, is rather like the cast in a movie. So you'll have your lead actor. And in a landscape, I'm afraid it's blue. Sky, sea, trees, grass, they've all got blue in them as well. So that's your starting point. You start with blue. You then have a supporting actor, yellow. You mix that with the blue. Then you have green. So from those two colours, you're almost there. You can paint a decent landscape. You've got sky covered, you've got sea, you've got trees, you've got grass, you've got yellow for sand, rocks, whatever it is. From those two colours, mixed together with green, just based on the area within a landscape that uses up that amount of colour, you're almost there. And you've just used two pigments. Of course, you're going to want a few more colours than that. And so we bring in some ensemble cast members, reds. You use your red to modify your yellow and your blue. It helps to warm up greens. It helps you to mix greys, browns, and with those three primaries, you can pretty much hit whatever colour you want. Your other cast members are your earth tones as well. So burnt sienna, burnt umber, raw umber, these type of colours. Throw those into the mix as well, and you have a tremendous amount of flexibility in terms of the various colours you can mix. And you'll see that from looking at the charts that I've made. Finally, you might want to consider some cameo roles, and I have a few paints that fall into that category. Lavenders, turquoises, pinks that might just enable you to hit certain difficult to mix colours. For me, heather, bluebells, turquoise railings on Brighton seafront, funnily enough, they're not easy to paint from mixing your traditional three primaries. So occasionally they come into play. They play small little cameo roles, but they're useful to have in the palette. So that's what helps you to determine the colours that you're going to put into your palette. It should be fairly straightforward. You're going to need three primaries. You're going to need a few earth colours. You're going to need a few specific colours to hit little local areas within your painting, but not too much of those. The second consideration to make when thinking about the colours you want to sit on your palette are things like, how transparent are those pigments? Are they good for glazing? Raw sienna, for example, as a yellow, is beautifully transparent. And so if I want to make a green mix to glaze over something I've already painted, raw sienna is a natural choice. On the other hand, yellow ochre, don't even go there because it's very, very opaque and it will make what you've painted underneath look dull and muddy. And then, of course, there are other considerations like granulation. Certain pigments, cobalt blue and light red, for example, granulate when you mix them together. They don't like being mixed and they try to separate. And as that mix dries on the paper, you often achieve this lovely granulated texture, which is perfect for rocks, tree trunks, broken areas of a footpath or something like that. So having been through those considerations, what pigments to use to make up your palette, the colours that you want to hit, what you want to use them for, and the way that they interact together, I have come up with a fairly simple palette, and it's stood me in good stead for many years now. And it's based around three primaries, and I have a warm and a cool of each. So blues, warm, French ultramarine, cool, cobalt blue. Yellows, warm, raw sienna, cool cadmium yellow. Reds, warm cadmium red, cool crimson alizarin. And from those 6 primaries, I can dictate the look of the painting in terms of the atmosphere, whether or not it's a warm summer painting or a cool winter one. I can deploy those colours in different parts of the painting if I want cooler colours in the background and warmer ones in the foreground. And that's 90% of what I need. Following on from that, I have my earth colours, which are burnt sienna, raw umber, burnt umber, Payne's grey, neutral tint. Then I have light red, Naples yellow, and a few other colours thrown into the mix, but that's about it. And I know that from those colours, I'm going to be able to pretty much paint anything that I want. So let's have a look at the colour charts. Let me show you how they work, how I've put them together, and then hopefully you can have a go at making those as well, because it really is a worthwhile exercise. So these are my colour charts. They're very simple to do, and they're quite a lot of fun as well. And this one is focusing on my blues. French ultramarine, it's the warmest blue that I use, and then the cooler blue is cobalt blue. From time to time I'll use cerulean, but not so often. It's a useful local colour to have. I've put Payne's grey in here, which you may say, well, that's a neutral tone. Yeah, fair play, but it's got quite a lot of blue in it, and you'll see that when it's mixed with yellows, you can get some nice, deep, rich greens with it. So I've included that in my range of blues, which I've got down the left here, and I'm mixing them with one pigment at a time. So my 3 main yellows, my 3 main reds, and then I've got a couple of earth colours here that I use a lot, so burnt sienna and raw umber. And also, I've added neutral tint at the end as well, because think of neutral tint not so much as a colour, but as a darkening agent. If I wanted to darken French ultramarine by adding Payne's grey, yeah, it's going to make it darker, but there's still quite a bit of blue here. If I want a pure dark representation of French ultramarine, add a bit of neutral tint, and it doesn't change the colour temperature of the primary that you're mixing it with. So it's a useful pigment to have. I don't use it that often, but sometimes when you just want a pure dark representation of your primary, it's a useful thing to have. So by doing this, you can see I'm arriving at my secondary colours. Because it's predominant, well, it's all blue here, I'm going to have greens and purples mixed with the yellows and the reds. And you can see, just from looking at these, there's quite a range there already to use. And by doing this, you can identify the combinations that you want to use and that will work in your landscape paintings. So for me, let me give you a couple of examples. Cadmium red, French ultramarine produces this beautiful shadow colour. It's a sort of very warm grey, and I use it throughout my paintings. Same with this colour here. Raw sienna, French ultramarine, or raw sienna, cobalt blue, gives you these lovely sunlit greens. I know that those two are going to provide these results, and that's important. Over on this side as well, burnt sienna and cobalt blue, you mix them together, then of course they decide they don't want to be mixed and start unmixing themselves because they are granulating when you mix them together, and you get this lovely soft brown or grey. You can see here already that the two pigments are fighting to separate each other, and so that's where you get that lovely granulated texture. Get used to mixing these colours together, plot them out, have a look at the ones that you feel are going to give you the most flexibility or represent the way that you look at the landscape, and you'll find it a very, very useful exercise. So here are my yellows: raw sienna, yellow ochre, cadmium yellow, Naples yellow. I've mixed those with 3 reds, 3 blues, my earth colours, and again neutral tint. And you can see that they're quite, the results are quite similar across the board, but there's enough subtle variation there to warrant having these different varieties or these different pigments within your overall palette. Of course, our secondary colours from these combinations are going to be oranges and greens, and then we move into sort of greeny browns and oranges as we move into those earth colours at the end there. So that's your yellows. And then finally reds: cadmium red, crimson alizarin, permanent rose, and light red here, which again you could say, well, light red, it's really an earth colour. Yeah, it is, but it's the same with burnt sienna. You could also make an argument that burnt sienna is a red because it's got a lot of red in it, and it depends on the subjects you're painting, the landscapes you're looking at, and the look that you want to achieve within your work. For me, I find light red is an excellent red to work with because it granulates really well. So for rock surfaces, tree trunks, things like that, it granulates as it does with burnt sienna. So it gives you that nice textured look. And that's purely because the pigments aren't mixing together very well. They like to separate from each other. So again, you mix them with the yellows, you mix them with the blues and your earth colours and your neutral tint, and your resulting secondary colours are oranges and purples. Now, if you look at all of these, and this is from no more than a dozen or so pigments, you've got all this colour. That's a lot of colour, and I don't know about you, but certainly in England, I've not seen a landscape that has got that amount of colour in it. I think perhaps the most colourful painting, or landscape painting certainly, that I've done recently was one of the Ashdown Forest in autumn. You can see that there's quite a few blues, there's greens, there's oranges, earth colours, there's a lot going on. But it all hangs together with a sense of unity because it's based around 3 primary colours and a couple of earth colours. Get used to making these charts. Have a go at it. They're great fun to do. And once you've done them, study them. Have a look at the combinations that you think are going to work for you. And by doing that, you'll end up whittling down the number of options from what can be quite bewildering colour charts in terms of what you want to use to make up your palette. So having done my charts many times and many years ago, I have arrived at the colours that allow me to express the way I feel about the landscape. So let's have a look at them. I have a warm blue, French ultramarine. I have a cool blue, cobalt blue. I have a warm red, cadmium red. And I have a cool red, crimson alizarin. I have a warm yellow, raw sienna. And I have a cool yellow, cadmium yellow. Those 6 pigments allow me to paint, I don't know, 90% of all my paintings. I vary them up from time to time. Yellow ochre, which is very similar to raw sienna, is useful to have because it behaves differently when you're painting wet into wet, but by and large it's a very similar colour, just maybe not quite as transparent as raw sienna. Working down this side, then I've also got Naples yellow. Like I said, that's great for painting skies, really good colour, but no good for glazing. It's quite opaque, so you have to keep that in mind.
This is an interesting colour here. It's what I call a local colour. It's called buff titanium, and I use it from time to time for very pale white sandy beaches. Again, it's quite opaque, not that good for mixing, certainly no good for glazing, but it's a useful colour to have from time to time. My other reds, light red, which we talked about on the charts. You could say, well, it's an earth colour. Yeah, sure, but I've got it in my red section. And then we've got a red, very transparent, lovely for glazing. It's got a lot of blue in it. It's permanent rose. And then again, another little local colour here, lavender. I don't use it very often at all, but it is quite good with cobalt blue or French ultramarine for getting the right hue for bluebells, which I find not that easy to mix from just my blues and my reds. It just makes them a little bit too pink, a little bit too purpley. So that's a sort of local colour, and it pretty much only comes out for that. Down this side, I've got neutral tint in the corner there. Useful to have, darkening, but again, I try not to do that. Ideally, darken your primary colours with the two opposing primaries. So if I want a darker version of cadmium red, or a duller version I should say, I would mix that with some yellow and some blue. Red, green, opposite on the colour wheel, they have the effect of dulling one down. So that's preferable, but if you want a pure dark version of a primary, bring your neutral tint into play, no problem. Payne's grey, raw umber, burnt sienna, and finally sepia here. Again, I don't use sepia that often. Sometimes it's quite nice to use if you're just doing monochrome tonal sketches. And that's it. That's the range of colours that I use. And I know where they are on the palette instinctively. I don't have to think about where my cobalt blue is. I know that if I need to paint a shadow colour, I don't have to go into a palette that's got 320 different colours on it and go, now what was my shadow colour? I can't remember. I can get it from these two. I know where they are. I mix them. It's there. It's instinctive. And having done this for years and practicing that allows you to have that confidence with your colour mixing. And I would say it is perhaps one of the most important skills you can learn, is to work with a limited palette, know where your paints are, know the combinations that they make, mix them instinctively, and your paintings they'll go up to another level. So I think I'm going to do a quick painting, or a sketch probably, that just has a simple sky in it, nice big oak tree perhaps, a little bit of landscape underneath. And of course you'll see what's going on there, but pay most attention to what's going on in the palette. Have a look at how the colours that I'm using are mixing together and creating the colours that I want to express how I feel about this particular landscape. And it's going to be very, very simple. I'm going to use some yellow ochre. I'm going to use some French ultramarine. I'm going to use a little bit of cadmium red, and probably some burnt sienna as well. And that will be more than enough. Now, just a quick word about these wells here. I never fill these up with sort of fresh paint out of the tube, but I keep these for my darks, because I like to make a dark, let's say from French ultramarine, burnt sienna. I'll mix it up and it's there. I can use it for whatever it is, tree branches, stones, things like that. I'll often have a dark that's a version of those two colours, the blue and the red. I'll have a dark that's a dark green as well. And I just mix them up each time I do a painting and vary them as I need them. Really, really useful to have those, because it allows me to keep these areas free for my colour mixing. This side, by and large, is for my yellows and my greens. This side here is for my blues, greys, browns, those type of colours. And I tend to keep them separate, but as you'll see, they encroach on each other with alarming regularity. So let's get plenty of colour mixed up. Start off with some yellow, a little bit of red. That can be for a sunlit edge to a cloud. That'll be fine. Our blue. A little bit of red. Just calms it down a little bit, stops it looking too vivid. And then over here, put a bit more red into that, and a little bit of yellow, and straight away we've got a nice shadow colour for the cloud. Perfect. So here we go. Let's just get some clear water onto the paper, and then I'll drop in some of this nice yellow colour. Suggests the top edge of the cloud. Then in with our blue. Some of that run in, and let some of it stay clear, so you get a combination of hard and soft edges in the sky. Always looks quite nice. Fine. Now we come to our shadow colour. Might just need a little bit more of that. Paint that into the bottom, these cloud shapes. A little bit more blue. No harm in that down here. And then let's just finish off with a sort of warm mix at the bottom of the sky, as the sky tends to do. I'm going to keep that edge nice and wet and go straight into the area of landscape. So on the left hand side I want quite a nice strong sunlit green, so we start off with yellow, we add a little bit of blue to it, and so it is a yellowy green. That's how the sun is moving across the landscape here. On this side we've still got our blue here. We'll put a bit of yellow in, because on this side of the landscape it's going to be cooler. The sun is not catching, well, let's say there's an undulation in the field that is cast into a little bit of shade. There we are. So on this side we want sunlight. Leave a few of these little white areas here, they look great in a watercolour, don't they? And I'm not going to bother being too fussy about what's going on here. It's just a case of registering some sort of landscape. Then we come in with our shade, let that all run in together, and you see not only are these colours running together in the palette, they're running together as well on the paper. So there's mixing continuing to happen here, and be mindful of that, because it can actually save you an awful lot of work. There's a bit more yellow along the bottom. Perfect. Now I'm going to have just some distant trees here, and I need quite a strong mix because this is drying up on me now, and we don't want cauliflowers happening. So even though this is the sunlit side of the tree, it's in the distance, so it's got to be cooler. And I'm just going to drop this colour in. And it doesn't look sunlit at the moment. I'm happy to grant you that. Yeah, let's have a few more over here. But then what I'm going to mix up is my shadow colour, and because this is so cool, it actually makes the left-hand side of the tree, bush, whatever we want that to be, it makes it look sunlit, albeit in the distance. So my colours that I'm using here, they're cool in the distance, they're warming up as they come towards me, and that's what helps to give a nice sense of recession through the painting. While this is still wet, don't stop there, let's do something with it. Let's start using some of these little wells here. So I've got a mix of burnt sienna and French ultramarine. Let's just freshen that up a little bit. And I don't know, why don't we have a little area of mud that might be underneath the tree. Could be a path, or where livestock graze, something like that. And it's just breaking up the monotony of the field a little bit. Still just damp enough for me not to get any hard edges here. But what I want to do is put in a very strong mix now of my shadow colour, because under this tree here, that I'm going to put probably round about there, there's going to be a strong shadow being cast across the landscape. I'm using the rigger. It seems a strange thing to do for what is a reasonably sizable part of the painting, but it doesn't hold too much paint. Because I'm working wet on wet, I don't want this wet paper to suddenly suck a lot of paint out of what would be quite a large brush. So let's get that shadow in there. A bit of shade on the back of some of these ruts or divots in the field, whatever you want them to be. And that's all I'm going to do at this point, and I'm going to let all that dry. So we just need to put the large oak tree in, and I'm going to use pretty much the same colours. So let's get some nice sunlit green for the left-hand side of the tree. And then let's have a cooler green, and I'm just borrowing what's already on the palette, because I know from my colour charts what these colours are going to do when they mix together, and I know that by and large I'm not going to get any nasty surprises. I know what it's going to look like. It's a nice way to work. And then we've still got this dark colour here, which again is perfect for the side of the tree that's going to be in deep shadow. So let's just suggest in our oak tree. We'll have a bit in the middle here. I think that's going to be catching the light. And then we'll bring in some of this darker colour. Some low down branches as well. Over the front of there. That is looking a an oak tree-ish sort of shape. I'm leaving these holes in the middle here because that's what happens on trees, but they're nice little apertures through which you can run your branches and your trunks. Shadow colour now. Let's have some there. You can see it's all sort of running together as it is on the palette. Yeah, perfect. While this is wet, it's a good time to put in the tree trunk and the limbs and the branches and the twigs, and I'm going to put a little bit of yellow actually into this, just makes it a bit brighter, because I'll darken up the right hand side of it. And let's just use the side of the rigger. It's great for this because the rough paper allows things like that to happen, you see. You just make that into a branch. Didn't intend for that to happen, but that seemed to be the way that the watercolour wanted to behave, and you just go with it. I haven't got a tree in front of me, and that often helps actually when you're painting trees, because you can just respond to what's happening on the paper as opposed to slavishly copying a tree and saying, well, no, it's got to have a branch there because that's what it looks like in the picture. No, you don't need to do that. You're creating, you're making this up. It's great fun. This is why watercolour is so enjoyable, because it's so unpredictable. I sort of know what's happening based on years of experience, but I'm still going to get surprises as I do this. You've just got to go with them. Look at things, you know. Look at that there. It's just a hit and miss bit of painting, but logically, of course, that's becomes a branch. Simple. Let's bring this down into the shadow, and I'm just going to run the brush along there. Or your finger's quite good for that. Just smudge it off. There we go. As that's drying, I want to make this a lot darker, so again, straight over to my French ultramarine. More of that, more of the burnt sienna too. I'm cheating a little bit here because I haven't squeezed out any fresh paint for this. I'm trying to use up some of the hard caked on mess that's in the bottom of the palette, so just bear with me. Shadow side of the tree. Let's drop in some darks here while it's all still wet. Good enough. Now, I don't really have to do any more to the tree. I'm quite happy with it as it is. But of course, no landscape is complete without a few little fence posts somewhere. So let's get one in here. And there. Put one over this side to just balance things up a little bit. And what I might do is just with this grey colour here, is just suggesting some trunks in this sort of gap in the background trees or hedge, whatever we want it to be. And the same over this side. I think these perhaps are going to be trees, so let's treat them with a little bit more care. Distant fence post in that gap. And that's it. I don't really need to do any more to it than that, but as you can see, just from using my 3 primaries, yellow ochre in this instance, French ultramarine and cadmium red, I've access to all the colours that I'm ever going to need to make the landscape. I've just included some burnt sienna because it's a quick and easy way of injecting that nice reddy brown. I could laboriously mix it if I wanted to from my yellow and my red and then drop in a little bit of blue, but speed is of the essence with watercolour, so why not take advantage of the fact that burnt sienna can do that job for me with the trunk, with the areas in the field. And by knowing where my colours are, and by having a method on my palette that I understand and I stick to, it's almost second nature painting with these colours and hitting the right hues that I need and the strength of those to create this particular painting. After you've been doing it for a length of time, it all becomes instinctive, and that's just practice and sticking to a method and not trying to change it up too often. Find something that works, stick with it, because then you're able to hit your colours precisely and quickly. You can create paintings that hang together out of only a few colours. That's how watercolour works the best, in my opinion. If I had a wide array of little pools of different colour from, I don't know, some Viridian in here and then some Hooker's green in here and some sap green in here, and I decided that that tree needed to be Viridian and then that tree needed to be sap green, it just wouldn't hang together. It wouldn't look that good, I don't think. Try and get used to this way of working. Don't be worried about mixing in big spaces and allowing these colours to merge and run together, and start doing some of the mixing for you. Why make life difficult for yourself? Understand it, don't be afraid of it, and give it a go.
So that really is a whirlwind tour through the subject of colour, how it relates to landscape painting in watercolour. But I hope you've been able to take some things away from that, and that you've been inspired to have a go at making some of these colour charts for yourself. Perhaps you've found the way that I set out the palette to be interesting and an approach that you might like to try as well. And then hopefully, as I did that little sketch, you saw how instinctive it can be when you understand the colours that you have in your palette and the results that you get from mixing them. And when you've really grasped that, you're in a strong position to continue to make paintings that are very, very compelling, very, very attractive, and accurately document your response to the landscape. So I'll see you next time. I think we'll probably get into, I don't know what it's going to be. It might be something to do with brush strokes next, but I'll have a look at the list. I'll go back over that and look forward to seeing you then. Thanks for watching.